Okay, well, we've over the past months, really, we started off with the Book of Exodus, and then continued on looking beyond the Book of Exodus into the Book of Numbers to see the account of Israel's journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, the land that God had promised to give to Israel. And we're at the point where Israel, we've been here for a few weeks, so that Israel is encamped on the plains of Moab, just across the Jordan River, and making preparations to enter into the land. And in anticipation of Israel's entry into the land of Canaan, several things are done and various instructions being given to Moses and through Moses to the people, which are recorded in the final chapters of the book of Numbers. So this evening we'll be covering quite a lot of material, quite a lot of chapters here in the book of Numbers, and there'll be some uh, sort of variety really in some of the incidents that we're looking at. So it may seem a little bit disjointed, but it's all relevant to Israel's entry into the Promised Land. And we won't be reading uh, all of the chapters here or the passages, but really giving an overview of many of these incidents. So in Numbers chapter 26, following the plague that we saw last week that had killed 24,000 people after the Israelites had been distracted by the Moabites and became involved in idolatry. They were worshipping the false god Baal of Peor, and as a consequence of that, God had sent a plague which killed 24,000 of the Israelites. And then, as you recall from last week, God had instructed the Israelites to go and fight against the Midianites and to destroy them because of that influence that they had had in leading Israel astray. But now in chapter 26, following all of that, the Lord gives instructions to Moses and to Eleazar the high priest to take a census of the Israelite men, so to count the number of the Israelite men who are aged 20 years over and who are fit for military service. So they're about to face a war in Canaan to conquer the land, and so they need to know their military strength. So the first four verses of Numbers chapter 26 introduces this for us, which says, "After the plague, the Lord said to Moses and to Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel from 20 years old and upward by their fathers' houses, all in Israel, who are able to go forth to war." And Moses and Eleazar the priest spoke with them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, take a census of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses. The people of Israel who came forth out of the land of Egypt were, and then we go into a long list of names there from verse 5 down to verse 51, where the numbers for each of the tribes, excluding the tribe of Levi, are recorded. So the names of various families and clans which make up those tribes are given there in that passage, and the total number, as we see in verse 51 of the chapter, comes to 601,730. So this is a number of the men aged 20 and above who are fit for military service. The Lord then also gave some instructions concerning the division of the land in verses 52 to 56. So once they get into the land of Canaan, they have to divide up the land between the different tribes. And the land was to be divided by lot, and by the size of the land allotted to each tribe was based on the size of the tribe. So from that census, we can see the numbers which are involved in each individual tribe, and some of the tribes were bigger than others. So a large tribe, where a lot of people, would receive a larger inheritance of land, and a small tribe, not so many people, they would receive a smaller inheritance of land. Now, the tribe of Levi did not receive an inheritance of land, and so they're not included in this part of the census, but they are numbered separately in verses 57 to 62. There's a separate listing there of the numbers of the tribe of Levi, and details of Moses' own family are given there in verses 59 to 61, which says the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt, and she bore to Amram Aaron and Moses and Miriam, their sister. And to Aaron were born Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu died when they offered unholy fire before the Lord. So this is recalling Moses' family and that incident involving Nadab and Abihu, which we looked at a while ago now from the book of Leviticus there. But the number of the Levites here is the number is taken from every male who is from 1 month old and upward from the tribe of Levi, and that total, as we see in verse 62, comes to 23,000. A summary of all of this is provided in verses 63 to 65, the last verses of the chapter there. And we see from that that none of those who had been counted in the first census, which had been taken nearly 40 years earlier by Moses and Aaron in the wilderness of Sinai, it's recorded in Numbers chapter 1, none of those people are included, as they have all died in the wilderness during those 40 years, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua. The total number in that first census, again excluding the tribe of Levi, was 603,550, and that figure is given in Numbers chapter 1 and verse 46. So comparing that to the second census here, we see that the number of people now counted in the second census has decreased by 1,820. But the number in the tribe of Levi, though, has increased by 1,000. In the first census, in Numbers chapter 3, verse 39, there the males from 1 month old and upward, and the tribe of Levi numbered 22,000. And now in the second census, 40 years later, they number 23,000. So they've increased by 1,000 there. But the rest of the population, the males in the other tribes, that has decreased by nearly 2,000. Well, in that census there, in chapter 26, verse 33, there's mention of a man named Zelophehad. Verse 33 of chapter 26 says, Now Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, had no sons, but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Now, chapter 27 of the book of Numbers picks up on that story of Zelophehad. The five daughters of this man Zelophehad, and he's from the tribe of Manasseh, they come before Moses, Eleazar, the leaders, and the congregation, and they meet them at the tent of meeting to present their case concerning their inheritance. Zelophehad was one of those who had died in the wilderness. He hadn't been involved in, the daughters say that he hadn't been involved in Korah's rebellion, but he had died for his own sins. But he had not left any sons, only these five daughters, and the daughters had no inheritance rights. So without having a son to inherit what would be been his land, the land would be lost to Zelophehad's family, and his name would be forgotten. This is what the daughters say in verse 3 of Numbers chapter 27. Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his family because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brethren. So the daughters are asking that they should be given a possession amongst their father's family in order to preserve their father's name. And this was something that was considered to be very important for them to preserve that name. Now, since no provision had been made for this, Moses brought the matter to the Lord to seek his guidance on this, and the Lord agreed that the daughters should be given their father's inheritance in then verses 5 to 7. And so this established the principle that in a case where a man dies without having a son, then his inheritance should pass to his daughter. It goes on here to say that if he has no daughter, then it would pass to his brothers. If he has no brothers, it would pass to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then it would pass to his next nearest relative. So this is the provision that is being made here. This case of Zelophehad and his daughters arises again in the final chapter of the book, in Numbers chapter 36. So we'll go over there to the end, to Numbers chapter 36. And here we see that the leaders from the tribe of Manasseh, which is the tribe of Zelophehad, they come to Moses now and they express their concern that if any of Zelophehad's daughters marry someone from another tribe other than the tribe of Manasseh, then the land will be lost to the tribe into which the daughters have married. If they got married to someone from a different tribe, that land would go to their husband in the different tribe. So again, Moses answers this, having consulted the Lord, and the answer given was that the daughters of Zelophehad can marry, but they can only marry within the family of the tribe of their father. In other words, they could only marry someone from the tribe of Manasseh. And this was a principle, again, that was set a precedent that was applied throughout Israel, so that no land could then pass from one tribe to another by a daughter marrying into a different tribe. So in this way, all of the tribes would retain their own land, their own territory. So we're told at the end there that the daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded through Moses, and they married the sons of their father's brothers, their cousins, we might say. And so in that way, then it ensured that the land remained within the tribe of their father, within the tribe of Manasseh. So none of that land would be lost. So again, this is the reason this is being recorded here is to make provision for the situation that might occur when the people went into the land and when they were allotted those territories. So it's looking, applying sort of what principles would apply under those circumstances when the people are in the land. Well, moving on, going back to chapter 27 again. In the second half of the chapter, now we have the commissioning of Joshua to succeed Moses as leader of the people. Moses has led the people of Israel for the past 40 years, from bringing them out of Egypt through all of this time in the wilderness. His sister Miriam and his brother Aaron are already dead, and now he too is soon to die. God would not permit Moses to lead the people into the promised land, and so it would be necessary for a new leader to be appointed. The Lord instructed Moses to go up into the mountain of Abarim, from where he will be able to see the land. He'll be able to look across the Jordan River and see the land which God is going to give to the people of Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 34, we learn that it was from Mount Nebo, in that range of mountains, that Moses went to that mountain and he could see the land from there. And then when God says that when he's seen the land, he says, you shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was gathered. So God is telling Moses here, you'll go up the mountain, you'll be able to see the land, and then you will die after that. To be gathered to your people is that expression that's used there for his death. And the reason why Moses will be taken before he can lead the people into the land is explained again for us here. God says to him, "Because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin during the strife of the congregation to sanctify me at the waters before their eyes." And if you remember back a few weeks ago, we looked at this incident in chapter 20, where Moses strikes the rock, where the people have been complaining about the lack of water, and the manner in which he did it was seemed to have been inappropriate, and God had forbidden him then to lead the people into the land. So here Moses asks the Lord, and he addresses the Lord here as the God of the spirits of all flesh. He asks him to appoint a man who will be able to lead the people, to go out before them and come in before them. He says in verse 17, so that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep which have no shepherd. Leaders of God's people are often pictured as shepherds. So Moses is concerned that God should appoint someone who will be able to lead them as a shepherd would lead the sheep. Well, the Lord instructs Moses then to take Joshua the son of Nun, who is described as a man in whom is the Spirit, and to lay his hand upon him. The laying on of the hands is a gesture which would mark Joshua out as Moses' successor. Joshua is then to stand before Eleazar the high priest and before the whole congregation, whilst Moses commissions him in their sight. And Joshua is to be invested with some of the authority of Moses so that the people would obey him. And Joshua will stand before Eleazar, who will inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. If you remember, the Urim and the Thummim were those probably stones which were in the breast piece of the high priest, and they were used to determine the will of God. So Eleazar the priest will help Joshua so that Joshua will be able to know what God's will is. So we see that Joshua doesn't have the same sort of authority as Moses himself does, or the same access to God as Moses did. Moses, we were told, had that close relationship with God and spoke to God face to face. Well, it's not that way with Joshua. Joshua is invested with some of the authority of Moses, and he will be able to determine the will of God through the help of Eleazar and the use of the Urim and the Thummim. So Joshua would provide that leadership for the people. He would go out before them, and on his word they would come in as well. So Moses here obeys God's instructions, and so Joshua is commissioned to succeed him as leader. And Joshua would seem to be the natural choice to succeed Moses. He's already led the Israelites in battle against the Amalekites when we were first introduced to Joshua back in Exodus chapter 17. This is what hit the first thing he's mentioned in connection with that, leading the Israelites in that battle. He had accompanied Moses up Mount Sinai when the law was given, and he's been often described as Moses' servant. He's been with Moses. He was also one of the 12 spies who had been sent into the land, and along with Caleb, he had encouraged the people to go into the land and to take the land. So all of these experiences have prepared Joshua for this task of leadership to which he's now appointed. Leadership is not something that suddenly is conferred upon a person, but people have to grow and develop into leaders, into leadership. And Joshua has been going through that process, and now God appoints him to succeed Moses. Well, in chapters 28 and 29, we have details given concerning offerings and festivals which have really already been given at Mount Sinai, and they're repeated here in order to remind the people of their obligations when they get into the land. So again, this is all about preparation and preparing the people for what they will need to do once they get into the land. Similar instructions to those given here are recorded in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. And here in this list, in chapters 28 and 29, the offerings are ordered according to their frequency. So from daily to weekly to monthly to the annual festivals. The first mentioned there are the daily burnt offerings in chapter 28, verses 1 to 8. And here, two male lambs, a year old without blemish, are to be offered every day. This is referring to the priests who would be offering these. One would be offered in the morning and the other in the evening, along with a cereal and a drink offering. And then there's the Sabbath offering. Here, two male lambs, a year old without blemish, were to be offered on the Sabbath. And this is in addition to the regular daily burnt offering. So the total there would be four lambs, and of course no work was to be done on the Sabbath. And then there's the new moon offering. So at the beginning of each month, two young bulls, one ram, seven male lambs, a year old without blemish, cereal and drink offerings, and a male goat for a sin offering. All of these were to be offered to the Lord on at the beginning of each new month, the new moon offering. And then with the annual feasts, we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, mentioned in chapter 28, verses 16 to 25. The 14th day of the first month, which the name of the first month was Nisan, or the earlier name of the month was Abib, which is the equivalent of March, April time in our calendar. The 14th day of that month is the Passover, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread follows immediately, starting on the 15th day of that month, and it lasts for 7 days. And that is observed in remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. So all of the details for that feast are given there in verses 16 to 25. And then we have the Feast of Weeks, verses 26 to 31. This is also known as the first fruits, and later in the New Testament it's referred to as Pentecost. It was held 50 days after the Passover, and it was a harvest festival. It marked the end of the barley harvest. The Hebrew name or Jewish name of the feast is Shavuot, and it happens around May time. I think this year it will be on the 22nd of May, will be that date for that celebration. And then there's the Feast of Trumpets, mentioned in chapter 29, verses 1 to 6. This is held on the first day of the seventh month, which is the month of Tishri. In our calendar, that's September to October. And it marked the beginning of the new civil year. Rosh Hashanah is the name that the Jewish community give to that new year. And the Jews followed two calendars, a religious calendar, which began with the Passover, that's the first month, and then the civil calendar, which begins here in the seventh month of the religious calendar. So Rosh Hashanah. And then we have, still in the seventh month, is the Day of Atonement, verses 7 to 11. That's held on the 10th day of the seventh month. Yom Kippur is the a Jewish name for this. And that's the day, the most solemn day, really, not a celebration, but a solemn day when the people remembered their sins and when atonement was made for the sins of the people. So that was a day of fasting. And then still in the seventh month, there is the Feast of Tabernacles, or it's also referred to as the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Ingathering. And that one is held on the 15th day of the seventh month, and it lasted for 7 days. And The details there in the passage uh, give the details of the offerings, the different offerings that were to be made on each day of that feast. And Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, was observed in remembrance of the years that Israel spent in the wilderness. Sukkot is the Hebrew name for that. And then in chapter 29, at the end of chapter 29, there's a summary of all of these things in verses 39 and 40, which says, "These you shall offer to the Lord at your appointed feasts, in addition to your votive offerings and your freewill offerings, for your burnt offerings and for your cereal offerings and for your drink offerings and for your peace offerings." And Moses told the people of Israel everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So we see all of these sacrifices and offerings that were being made by the people throughout the course of the year, and every day, morning and evening, something was being sacrificed. But all of these sacrifices that the people are offering are ineffective in dealing with the problem of sin. And it is Christ's sacrifice on the cross which ultimately brings to an end the need for all of these offerings that are being made. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament points this out to us, that those sacrifices made under that old law uh, did not help, didn't solve the problem of sin, but Christ's sacrifice, the greater sacrifice, does. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. The writer says, "But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy place, taking not the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the sprinkling of defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and with the ashes of a heifer sanctifies for the purification of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify your conscience from dead works to serve the living God?" Then in chapter 10, verses 1 to 4, the writer says, "Therefore, since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices which are continually offered year after year, make perfect those who draw near. Otherwise would they not have ceased to be offered. If the worshippers had once been cleansed, they would no longer have any consciousness of sin. But in these sacrifices there is a reminder of sin year after year, for it is impossible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins." So the writer showing us there how Christ's sacrifice, his offering, is greater and more effective than all of these animals that were being offered and sacrificed there in Israel under the law. Well, continuing on here in in chapter 30, there's some laws here concerning vows, and the connection here with the previous chapter is perhaps in that people would uh, as part of their offerings would be vowing or promising things to God. So chapter 30 here gives us some laws, instructions concerning the making of vows, and the binding nature of vows and oaths is emphasized here in this chapter, that a man must do what he says that he will do, what he has promised to do. The chapter also uh, uh, shows some circumstances in which a vow may be rendered void or ineffective. So laws concerning the vows there, but we won't look any further into that. You could read that if you're interested in reading that further. We'll move on here to chapter 32. Chapter 31 we looked at last week, which was the battle that the Israelites had against the Midianites. So we looked at that last week. So we'll jump forward here to chapter 32. And in chapter 32, we have a request being made of Moses by the tribes of Reuben and Gad. At the beginning of the chapter here, we have The tribes of Reuben and Gad coming to Moses and asking if they can settle in the land on the eastern side of the Jordan, the land of Gilead, because they say it is good land for cattle and they have a lot of cattle. Now, the issue here is that this is outside of Canaan. This is not the land that God has promised to give the people of Israel. And so, why are they asking to settle in that land? Moses' reaction to this is recorded in verses 6 to 15. And Moses thinks that these tribes are trying to get out of their responsibility to help in the conquest of Canaan, and that their attitude is going to discourage the people from crossing over into the land. Moses is afraid that the events that happened at Kadesh Barnea, when the people heard the report of the spies who'd gone into the land, and they reported how difficult the land was going to be to conquer. That Moses is afraid that those things are being repeated here. And those events had led to God consigning the Israelites to the wilderness for 40 years until that adult generation had died. So Moses is concerned that the two tribes here of Reuben and Gad, they're going to cause discouragement amongst the people, and the people won't want to go over Jordan to take the land. However, the tribes of Gad and Reuben try to reassure Moses, and they say that they will leave their wives and their children and their flocks and their cattle in their settlements on the eastern side of the River Jordan, but the men will go across and they will help the other tribes to conquer the land of Canaan. In fact, they say they'll lead the way, we'll go first. And Moses agrees to this proposal. And then, when they have helped to subdue the land, then they can return to the eastern side of the Jordan and they can possess the land there. However, if they refuse to help, they will have sinned against the Lord. And then in verse 23, we have what is really become a proverbial saying in English, and be sure your sin will find you out. Meaning that there will be consequences. If you don't help, you'll have sinned and there will be consequences to this. So that they have made a promise to do this to help, and they must keep that promise. So Moses' decision is then conveyed to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua because Joshua will be the one who will be leading by that time. When they do cross over, Moses won't be there anymore, so Joshua will be the leader. So Moses tells Eleazar, Joshua, and the tribal leaders of this arrangement with the tribes of Gad and Reuben. And if they help the tribes conquer the land of Canaan, then they will be given the land of Gilead on the eastern side of the Jordan. And again, the tribes of Gad and Reuben reaffirm their promise to help. They say that they will do that. But we see, in addition to the tribes of Gad and Reuben, half of the tribe of Manasseh are also allotted land on the eastern side of the Jordan. Verses 33 to 42 records here the allotment of the land, and the land that Moses assigns to them are the former kingdoms of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and Og, the king of Bashan, who Israel had earlier defeated. So they're going to get that land. And the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half Manasseh kept their promise, and they did help in the conquest of Canaan, after which they returned to their land east of the Jordan. And the account of this is given in the book of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. This is when the people are crossing the Jordan to go into the land. We're told here the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had bidden them. About 40,000 ready armed for war passed over before the Lord for battle in the plains of Jericho. So they are in the front there. They're leading those over into the land. And then chapter 22 of the book of Joshua records them going back to their land after they've given that help in the conquest. Chapter 22, verse 1. Says then Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh and said to them, You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brethren these many days down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brethren as he promised them. Therefore turn and go to your home in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. Take good care to observe the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments and to cleave to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. And then verse 9 says, So the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh returned home, parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, their own land, which they had possessed themselves by command of the Lord through Moses. So we see they kept their word, they helped, and then they went back home, and Joshua blessed them and sent them home. So we see on the map here the area which is in green on the map there, which is the territory that those two and a half tribes would occupy. The grey area is the land occupied by the other tribes, but the green area is that which is occupied by the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh. Well, chapter 33, we have here a record of the journeys. That this is the journey from Egypt to the plains of Moab. Moses had kept a written record, like a diary or a travel journal, really, of the journey of the Israelites from Ramesses in Egypt to the plains of Moab, recording the various places that they encamped along the way. And there's 42 stopping places that are listed there. To us, they're just sort of names on a list, which don't really mean very much. But what we see looking at the whole of that is what a great achievement this was for Israel, that they've gone through this great journey from Egypt, uh, being led by God bringing them through the difficulties and the challenges of that journey to bring them to the verge of entry into the land that God was going to give them. And here's again the map. Following the red line, the red route there shows us that journey that they made during that 40 years, beginning in Egypt at Ramesses or land of Goshen, and then down to Sinai, and then up to where we are now on the plains of Moab. Well, there are then in chapter 33, from verse 50 through to chapter 35, there are various commands given concerning what was to happen when they got into Canaan. And there's the command to drive out the inhabitants of Canaan in verses 50 to 56. And a failure to drive out the inhabitants would cause problems for Israel. So verse 55 the Lord says, But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you let remain will be as pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. And I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So warning there that there would be trouble for them if they didn't do as God had instructed in driving out the inhabitants of Canaan. Then in chapter 34, verses 1 to 15, there's an account given of the boundaries of the land that they are to possess. And we see on the map here that sort of purple coloured area is the boundaries that are indicated from this account in chapter 34. This territory was never really fully occupied by Israel. This is sort of the ideal, what they should have been able to get, but they didn't ever actually occupy as much. They got close to it in the time of David and Solomon, but didn't quite fully occupy the whole of the territory that God had promised or was willing to give them. We then have in verses 16 to 29 the men who were chosen to divide up the land. So Eleazar, Joshua, and then one representative from each of the tribes were appointed to divide up the land of Canaan for an inheritance amongst the tribes of Israel. And as we saw earlier, that the size of the territories would depend on the size of the tribes themselves, that the larger tribes would get more land than the smaller tribes. And then we have in chapter 35 the cities that would be appointed or allotted to the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi was not allotted an inheritance of land as the other tribes were, but instead they were given 48 cities with their pasture lands, and these 48 cities were spread throughout the land of Canaan, the promised land. And the Levites would live in these cities and have the pasture land there for their cattle and their livestock. The names of those cities are listed in Joshua chapter 21. And then from those 48 Levitical cities, 6 were chosen to be what were called cities of refuge. 3 would be in the land of Canaan on the western side of the Jordan, and 3 would be on the eastern side of the Jordan. And these cities of refuge, would provide a refuge or a sanctuary for anyone who had unintentionally killed another person, to protect them from the avenger of blood whilst their case was being investigated. So if someone had killed another person, uh, a member of the family of the dead person had the right to take their life, to avenge the blood that had been shed. If in a case of a murder, premeditated murder, that would happen. But in the case where it was unintentional, accidental, then that person then could flee to one of these cities of refuge and seek refuge there whilst an investigation was held into the circumstances. And if it was decided that it was unintentional, then that person would have to remain in that city of refuge. They weren't allowed to leave the city, they had to live there until the death of the high priest. And then when the high priest died, they would be free to leave that city and go back home. If they left the city before the death of the high priest, then the avenger of blood had the right to kill them. The 6 cities are named in Joshua chapter 20, verses 7 to 8, and they're named as Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron, which are on the western side of the Jordan. And on the eastern side of the Jordan were the 3 cities of Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan. So again, they're spread out sort of throughout the land, so to provide people with that opportunity. So these measures are being taken and necessary in order to keep the land from being polluted by the shedding of blood. Verses 33 and 34 of chapter 35 says this: "You shall not thus pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of him who shed it." So in order to cleanse the land when incidents like this happen, the shedding of blood, it was necessary for someone to die. Either the one who had been guilty of the murder, if it was a murder, or the high priest, the death of the high priest. That would then cleanse the land of that pollution. Verse 34 says, "You shall not defile the land in which you live in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. So this is holy land. This is where God is dwelling. God is saying this is why this is important for it to be dealt with. So the map here shows uh, the land that was allotted to the various tribes there. We can see that on the eastern side of the Jordan there, the half tribe of Manasseh. The tribe of Manasseh is split between the Jordan on the western side, half of the tribe, and then on the eastern side, then Gad and then Reuben there on the eastern side, and then all of the other tribes, the territory that is allotted to those. And you can see the variation in the sizes of the territory that was allotted to them there. So the final, we looked at chapter 36 earlier with the daughters of Zelophehad, but the final verse of the book says this: These are the commandments and the ordinances which the Lord commanded Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. So a final summary there that this is what God has commanded these things through Moses to the people of Israel as they're waiting to cross the land. So the book of Numbers really has really been about the land and preparation for the occupation of that land by Israel in fulfillment of the promise that God made to Abraham way back in Genesis chapter 17 and verse 8, where God says to Abraham, "And I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." So we're seeing the fulfillment of that promise here in the book of Numbers. The handover of leadership to Joshua, Moses' farewell message to the people of Israel, and an account of the death of Moses are the subject of the book of Deuteronomy, which we're going to look at next week. And with that, we will conclude this series of lessons on Israel in the wilderness. So we'll just be giving a quick overview of the book of Deuteronomy next week and looking at the death of Moses there and the character of Moses that we'll be looking at, this great character of faith there. But we will stop here for this evening.